Looking for insight, inspiration, and community? Tune in to Behind the Camouflage, the podcast made for Marine Corps spouses by Marine Corps spouses. We cover everything from navigating military life to finding joy in the journey. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts and stay connected with those who understand.
Like in the fancy pants writing stuff, there's like this technique where they say that, when the action is hot, write cold, and that's exactly what Sledge does. He's got this detached technique when he's examining this horror. He doesn't throw a lot of himself in his own, he's literally just giving you the facts, right? And it makes it so much more, striking to just get this kind of somewhat detached examination of what he observed. And it's truly like, you can't help but read it and be jealous that he's able to do that, because one of the things I struggle with is I got to, pull back more because I want to explain more. I want to talk more about it, maybe even get into touchy feeling stuff about how this impacted me. But a lot of the times he'll just give you this beautiful description of what happened in a very, I don't even know if detached is the right word, but like, it's the observer, right? And you get these observations without a lot of the self in it, and it's spectacular.
Yeah, dude. I want to, like, if you could say that exact same thing here in about 5-10 minutes. I mean,
that's the soundbite. We're done.
Beautifully articulated. So,
hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, welcome to episode 244. This week we bring another installment of our new series, Literary Lethality, to the Scuttlebutt. In this series, we dive deep into the Commandant's professional reading list, exploring various titles and talking with authors about some of the books on the list. Today, we welcome Kacy Tellessen back to the show. Kacy talks to us about E.B. Sledge's quintessential war memoir, With the Old Breed. With the Old Breed has been on the Commandant's professional reading list continuously for 14 years, and, having his own beautifully written memoir, Freaks of a Feather, Kacy was the perfect person to talk to about this book. It was great to hear Kacy's thoughts on the book and to get a deep dive into literary arts by a literary artist. This is episode 244.
Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hi, Vic.
And we've got a real treat. We got the three musketeers back together. William's back. William's with us. How you doing, brother?
Howdy, y'all. I'm doing all right. How about you?
Good. I'm, coming down a little bit from the MDM, or I'm recovering at this point now from the MDM hangover. But just as I was getting my head above water, now I'm back under to try to make up from all the stuff I wasn't doing while I was at MDM. So
that's
good
where
times.
I am.
What's that? That's
where I am, trying to do all the stuff now that I just ignored for a week or two, whatever.
Yeah, we've got my oldest's birthday's coming up too, so I'm also gonna hopefully use the momentum of catching up to get ahead, because the beginning of June will probably be with all the events and stuff. So anyhow, so it's been great.
How old is the oldest?
I don't know. What's that?
How old is the oldest?
He will be 12.
12.
Yeah. Oh, so that voice you're hearing, for all of our listeners, is Kacy Tellessen is back. We are going to dive into some of the wonderful works of the Commandant's professional reading list. But Kacy Tellessen, man, thanks again for coming.
Oh yeah, my absolute pleasure.
Oh, dude, it's all on this end, man. But yeah, so my oldest is 12. You may not, I don't know if we've had this discussion, but a few years back, we shifted from doing a birthday party. And now they can choose a birthday party if they want, but we shifted to events. So rather than spending, $200 or whatever to get the food and all the stuff and party, all the stuff together, we take whatever money we would have used and then we apply it towards, events and stuff. So like they can go I think you could pay like an hour, all you can play at Chuck E. Cheese. They'll go do sometimes Top Golf has been a big one lately. I think we're going to go camping potentially for a couple days. I think there's a rugby match on Military Appreciation Day, which is his actual birthday. So stuff like that. So we just do sort of these things, and so they get experiences for their birthday instead of like stuff that they'll get bored with after a month. Yeah. So
Vic is so
good
well
call.
adjusted, isn't he? He's just so well adjusted. And just can you let everybody know when my birthday is so that I can also.
do you want to do Top Golf? We can do Top Golf.
I've never done Top Golf, so maybe
man.
maybe yeah.
It's awesome. It's hilarious.
There's actually a golf simulator bar on our first level of this building.
No
It's pretty
way.
cool. Yeah.
How do you get any work done?
I don't golf because I've always been too poor at golf and I've never picked it up, but it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you want to take your laptop downstairs, just kick it out and just make sure the volume's up so you can hear us. Just go for it.
Yeah. Like Kacy, like ding. Anyways.
The only kind of golfing I've ever done is mini golf, and that, we don't golf. I don't golf. I don't know how to do that.
Well, yeah, and not that we're looking for corporate sponsorship, but because we always are. But
We are.
if Top Golf wanted to come on board, I've got nothing but great things to say. But being that we aren't paid yet, I still think it's a wonderful, wonderful. So basically, what they did is genius. Is they just took a normal driving range and then just gamified it, and then put a kitchen with a bar, and so you can just do what you were going to do at a driving range, but you hit it, you get points, you play again, you can compete against other people, and they're going to bring you chicken wings and a bunch of beers and stuff, and it's awesome. I don't do that with the kids. Don't want to
Are we here, Vic, to advertise for a particular book on the Commandant's reading list as opposed to Top Golf?
All right, well played. All right, so yeah, as I'm
such a buzzkill, William.
as
God.
I'm sucking up all the oxygen.
I mean, if you want to, I guess you're in the office, so you can't really, start your buzz. But Vic and I are from home right now, so we could kick off this buzz and make this interview a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, seriously, we are here. We brought Kacy on to talk about. Did we already say the book? We're going to talk about a book from the Commandant's Professional Reading List. We're going to talk about the classic With the Old Breed. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I was saying before we started recording that I had never read it. I've been here at Leatherneck for 19 years, heard all about it, never read it until I was trying to prepare for this. Full confession, I'm listening to it on Audible, but it's one of the great. Well, for my purposes, it has to go on a separate list. Because I'm that uptight, but it can't make it into the books read list. It's got to be books listened to list.
I see.
Tell me you're not type A without. Wait, what is it? Tell me you're type A without telling me you're type A.
Oh yeah, no, I'm definitely type B there because that is a check in the box in my book.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm so glad that you suggested this book to us, Kacy, because I kind of feel like you gave me a gift to finally sit down and experience this book.
It was an easy decision. It was between this and Matterhorn, and somebody stole Matterhorn from me, which Matterhorn is another fantastic book.
It's amazing. Yeah,
it's amazing. But it's fiction. It's a different ball game, a different world. The different categories.
Yeah, that was Plunkett who stole it from you, man. Sorry.
Yeah. I remember. I'll never forget, actually.
We as part of the segment that we're doing, we're calling literary lethality. Just for our listeners, if this is your first time listening, this is one of my favorite segments. We're reaching out to authors, either the author of the book, like when we had Ian Brown on, or just authors that we fully respect and admire for their own writing style, to give us their takes on some of the selections that are on the Commandant's Professional Reading List, and do a deep dive into the individual books rather than just talking about the Commandant's Professional Reading List in sort of a holistic way. So obviously Kacy's been on a few times. Your book, Freaks of a Feather, is still just one that just touches my heart so deeply. I can't stop talking about what an amazing artist you are. And so we thought, when we came up with the idea for this segment, like, we have to get Kacy on. So I reached out. You said we have to do with the old breed. Said Roger that, and here we are, man. So thank you again for this recommendation.
No, it's truly a privilege. Thank you very much.
So, all right, well, let's jump in. Kind of just to kick it off, what would your Amazon, like your 5-star rating of With the Old Breed be, and why?
Well, it would be the 5-star, and that's only because I can't give it more stars than that.
Nice.
We kind of talked about this a little bit in the preamble, but for me, With the Old Breed is the war memoir upon which all other war memoirs are judged by. I think, to me, this captures so perfectly the moment, the time, the place, but not just that. It's really a timeless story, and a lot of grunts who went to war from any generation can read this, and you can see the through line. You can see your heritage. You can see the same kind of young man seems to have always been joining the Marine Corps. And that's what you get when you read Sledge's book. And for me, as a writer, when I'm reading books, I'm reading to steal stuff, right? So I'm reading to steal, the greatness of Sledge and try to make it, kind of take it and, change it and kind of make it my own. So, like, as a writer, when you go back and you read this book, there's so many things that a writer can steal and learn from in this book. And it's unbelievable that this is his kind of debut, and this was his first, work of, long form work like this. I'm sure he published a lot as a biology professor, but this is his first book, and it's magnificent. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's timeless, and it absolutely belongs on the Commandant's reading list for all time, and I hope it stays there forever.
Yeah, that's such a great roll up. I want to also, for our listeners who maybe don't know this, but the series that Hanks and I'm drawing. What's that?
Spielberg.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did the Pacific is based on this book. But having seen that series previous, so I went opposite. I mean, the book is just, and I get it. Like, there's so much you can do with the medium of film, but the book, and I'll let you describe some of what it is, but it's just, it is just so much more, I don't know, but internal, because you're getting the interiority, you're getting the on-scene observations. You're not looking at it from this removed sort of 35-foot view. You're seeing it from his perspective and everything. Yeah. So go check out The Pacific. It is a wonderful series, but read this book.
And the Pacific also captured another book called Helmet for My Pillow.
Right.
And that's sensational too. I mean, I think as a voice, like, I connect more with Lecky, the guy who wrote Helmet for My Pillow, simply because him and I both aren't as good of people as Sledge, right? So and Sledge is such a good person, you know what I mean? And that's one of the magnificent things about the book, is you get to see when this truly good person gets thrown into this absolute apocalypse of the Pacific theater. And that, him being our observer for this book, I mean, that brings a whole different level to, what this book actually means and what its genetic makeup is. But again, I can't recommend Helmet for My Pillow enough. And Lucky was a machine gunner like me too, so I'm a little biased there.
Yeah, I will say too, one of the things about this book that absolutely got me, like, hooked almost instantly was how much he referenced the Amtrak's. I'm like, this guy knows what's up. He knows what's going on.
I thought about you, Vic, while every time he mentioned Amtrak's, I was like, oh yeah, Vic's probably digging that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no, it was like, yeah, I'm like, this, he really understands the Marine Corps. But I want to talk a little bit about what you just mentioned, Kacy, because it was one of the things that really gripped me about this was in seeing Sledge's evolution. So and I'm not pushing back, but I just want to get your perspective on this idea that he's a good person in this, sort of in this terrible situation. But the terrible situation does transform him. I even noted a part in the beginning where he said, everything in my life before and has been after pales in light of that awesome moment when my Amtrak started in amid a thunderous bombardment toward the flaming, smoke-shrouded beach for the assault of Peleliu, which, again, like you were sort of mentioning the conciseness and the impact of it. He's letting the scene do the work. But the thing about it was that he is so unapologetic about his transformation, because there's another scene where he's looking at the dead Japanese medic who's working on the two artillerymen that are dead, and how he couldn't even move and stop staring. But then the old breed Bubbas came in and just started pilfering all these stuff. And he said, I never wanted to be like that, but pretty soon I did become like that. And obviously I'm paraphrasing. So what do you think about that, how he sort of crafts his own evolution?
Well, I think it's one of those universal truths of combat, that it doesn't really matter. It matters, but you're going to be affected by it forever, right? And he's no different, to where you drop the child of a doctor in good Southern upbringing, you know what I mean? You get his earlier life a little bit, and you see he's kind of a goody two shoes, doesn't drink hardly.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets put into this, like we were saying, this apocalypse, and he's obviously deeply affected by it. But it begs the question of, like, what happens when you take someone who is already a violent person and then you put them into this situation? And I've always kind of thought about combat, and is that it's kind of like the great distillation process, where it distills who your character is and who you actually are, And so, yes, he does go through, he becomes harder, and, but he still maintains, some of his moral code throughout the entire book, right? There's still things that he pushes back on throughout the whole time. I'm thinking of the instance where one of his squad mates takes a severed hand as a trophy, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Sledge has the courage to say, even to this guy who's just endured this, horror, and he's like, this is too much, you know what I mean? This is just too much. And he still has that moral compass to be able to push back. And even more so, the combat has kind of distilled that courage that he has the courage to confront, one of his friends about how wrong this is. And so for me, obviously he's going to be affected, and he's always affected, but he is, I think, just generally speaking, the read I get from Sledge is he's just genuinely a good person, and that's still, he's still able to, one of the beautiful things, he's able to maintain that throughout the book. I mean, like I said, he does harden, he does get, more callous, but he does maintain I think he maintains the moral compass throughout.
Yeah. Interesting.
I would agree with that too. And I was thinking about the part where they encountered an old woman in a hut on Okinawa, and she has this terrible infected abdominal wound, and she gestures for Sledge to put her out of her misery and shoot her, and he won't do it. And he goes out and gets a corpsman, and while he's bringing a corpsman back to offer her some sort of aid, which they think is probably not gonna, that she's too far gone anyway, another one of the Marines goes in and just very coldly shoots her in the head, and Sledge is outraged. That's pretty close to the end of the book. And so I don't think that yes, you're right. He became a little more hardened, but he never lost his humanity. Anyway, that was the part that kind of jumped out at me when you brought that up, Vic.
So Vic and Kacy, I have a question for each of you, since you're the Marines in the room. When did you read this book? Did you read it before your Marine Corps career, or during your Marine Corps career, or afterward?
Vic, you want to take it first?
Yeah, mine's easy. I read it when Kacy said he wanted to read it. So I like Nancy, it's just one of those that, like, I'm not doing my duty as a Marine. I just read it, yesterday, basically. I finished, yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
but Kacy, yeah, go ahead.
I read this book a few times. I read it first in high school. So you know, I've written about this too, but like part of the things that got me to the Marine Corps was books, right? And this book was definitely one of them. I read the Iliad in high school and it got me obsessed with war and that kind of stuff, which led me eventually to the Marine Corps. And then I got through all the memoirs I could. And With the Old Breed always stood out to me as like, and it's always interesting. That every time you read the book, you're a different person. The book impacts you differently. You catch more every time. As a young man, in high school, I think I was 16 or so. I didn't understand maybe I still don't understand what this book is truly about, but like I read it as just a war story, and I read it as like, I want what Sledge has, which is interesting, kind of ties into what you said, Vic, about the old breed and that kind of stuff, about how, originally he thought he wanted to be the old breed. And then he starts to think, maybe I don't want to be like these guys. When I was young like that, I read With the Old Breed and I was like, I definitely want to be like the old breed. I definitely want to be like Sledge, And for me, obviously Sledge is the old breed too, but it's, yeah, I read it in high school and then I read it again during the Marines, and then I read it one more time after that. So this is my fourth read through. I get something new out of it every time too.
That's awesome.
So my follow-up question is, when you read it during your time in the Marine Corps, was it in isolation or was it part of a greater PME? Like, were other people reading at the same time as you? Was there any discussions about it? Like, how does the Marine Corps approach this particular book? It's on the Commandant's reading list. How do they use it as a teaching tool?
I mean, my understanding of it was legend. You know what I mean? It was the part of the legend that, the scaffolding that holds up the Marine Corps is legends, right? And Sledge and the Old Breed were part of that legend. And it is, it wasn't part of any kind of official, reading program. I'm sure it was on the list or whatever, but there was always books in the PX that you could buy. This is one of the books that I saw in the PX, and I was like, I'm going to pick this up again. And,
yeah, I think if you get a unit library thing via the Marine Corps Association, I think it's part of that as well.
Which is a super cool program. And we kind of had to create our own somewhat, like when we were in Iraq, a bunch of us brought books, and so we would pass books around, And I mean, there was some just random books at the FOB, which was always kind of fun to just like pick up a random book you had no idea about and read. But With the Old Breed, it was always talked about. I mean, I wasn't a mortarman, but the mortarmen are always super proud of this book. And that's part of the legends too, is like everybody gets their own, legend for their MOS, right? So Sledge is, undoubtedly a legend for mortarmen. Lecky for us is a machine gunner. Obviously, John Basilone, you know what I mean? Like these are the legends that you emulate and you try to, so when you're reading it in the Marines, right, you're reading for motivation, you're reading for guidance, right, on how I should act in combat, and you're also reading to see what can I learn, right? If I can live through Sledge's experience, can that help me when I go to Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever conflict I may? It's like what you can learn from these guys, right? Because we talked about briefly, like a lot of these experiences are universal, right? So whether or not it's even tactics, it's like, how do I emotionally compartmentalize to keep going? How do I do all these things? Because guys have done it before me and they're going to continue to do it. So that's one of the benefits I got from reading this while I was in the Marines.
Well, then who do you think then that he wrote this for? Who is his audience here? I know there's obviously stuff in the acknowledgments and in the forward and stuff like that, but I don't understand. You could just take his words for it. He talks about having written it right after.
Yeah.
But it's from a publishing standpoint, though. Who do you think is his audience? Is it the Marines that, is this his legacy that he's given to us? Or is it to the rest of America? Like, because there's so much talk about how Peleliu maybe shouldn't have even happened. Is this a sort of, hey, American population, this things that we are doing, like war really is hell? Or is it all of those things?
I think it's, option C, all of the above. What I mean? I think, as he talks about in the foreword, he originally wrote this to communicate to his family's experiences, and that parallels with my experience too, is what I wanted to do was essentially try to explain myself to my family And I think Sledge originally started out doing that as well. But it's these stories of the the frontline grunts, the guys on the ground. These are the stories that I personally am always. These are what I want. Like general stuff, cool, whatever. I have no connection with that, right? So when I read this stuff, it's like reading about an alien or something,
Yeah.
But I can connect with Sledge, and and I think if you're truly going to understand a conflict, while those general narratives are obviously incredibly important, it is the frontline soldier, the frontline Marine. That's where you'll get the true experience, right? That's where you'll get. I mean, because if you have a general writing about Peleliu, they're going to talk about the strategic brilliance of it and all of these different things, right? You're not going to know what it's like to be fighting off crabs, land crabs, and trying to the simple stuff like where do you go to the bathroom? You know what I mean? Like all these kind of things. And then just how do you endure? How do these guys? They're not just pinpoints on a map. These are human beings that are bringing their own life experience into this conflict. And it's so for Sledge. I think the audience. I'd hope that it's universal. It's for everybody, right? And I also hope that what you kind of seized on a little bit there, Vic, was that this is it's supposed to also be put everybody on notice for what real war looks like, what it does to the individual person. And so you would hope that for our leaders, political leaders, that kind of stuff, that they would read books like this and they would know that like when you're saber rattling, it's not just saber rattling, right?
Yeah.
There will be a person on the ground enduring this stuff, which will have generational impacts, to come. And so before you make decisions like this, pick up a book like With the Old Breed, read it, and then make your decision accordingly, because this will affect our youth. This will affect, the country we're still talking about Sledge's book.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such a great point. I think that we don't put enough, and obviously there's so many distractions that are literally in your pocket or in your hand anymore. But there is something just that is so engaging or almost embodying by reading this type of literary art, where you can, so that these discussions of like, oh well, just war, like because we follow just war theory, this is why we lose wars. Like, all right, dude, just pick it up, give it a read, and then you tell me if you think that just utter savagery is the way we should be executing war and just doing it at our whim. So I think what you're saying, man, has a lot of real value. That it isn't in a way just for Marines as a way of passing on a legacy, but I think it is to put the American public on notice, and particularly our leaders, that like, hey, when you go to war, this is what it looks like from the young men and women that are going to be executing it.
Yeah, no, and it's also that other thing you said about the Marine Corps too. Like this story is so important to the Marine Corps. For me, the Marine Corps is literally held together by stories, and it's how they, for lack of a better term, indoctrinate us at boot camp. It's how they build that, almost religious fervor in the Marine Corps is these stories. That you're constantly comparing yourself to every other Marine that came before you. Like, I'm sure it's your experience as well, Vic, that like obstacle courses are named after people with, Medal of Honor citations and stuff, and they'll read you the Medal of Honor citations, and it becomes, these stories are like sermons, you know what I mean? They're like religious experiences to be in this situation, hear these stories, and then go do whatever obstacle course it is. It's incredibly powerful stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things, just to shift gears a little bit, one of the things I thought was interesting is that when Sledge has something unfavorable to say about somebody, he doesn't give that person a name, which hats off to him. I'm not sure I would have been as kind, but I think it just speaks to what kind of person I am now assuming he must have been. But I thought that was a class act that he doesn't name names. Kacy, what do you think about that?
Well, he's obviously a better person than me because I name names. So again, like I said, Sledge is just a better person than I am. But it's in that same vein, what's really powerful about this book and what makes it really work is that he turns that criticism on himself, right? And he's not afraid to show the world his own shortcomings. He's not trying to hide who he was. Well, I read him and think he's just an absolute legend and a hero, really. But he never shies away from his own, like the instance when he's on guard and he shoots the stack of straw.
The
you know what I
straw,
mean?
yeah,
It's an incredibly embarrassing story, you know what I mean? But he includes it. And what that does for a reader, at least from my perspective, is that gives an author credibility, right? If an author's willing to be self-deprecating and they're willing to show you all their warts as well, you think to yourself, I can trust this person, right? Like this person, they're showing me everything, and they're not trying to glorify themselves. And that for writers too, that's an incredibly powerful tool, because any of the self-aggrandizing memoirs or anything like that, I mean, pick up a Navy SEAL book essentially, but it just reeks of BS, right? And it's like, is this true? You know what I mean? Like, are you literally this magnificent? Because nobody's actually this magnificent, and so that's why you get, this book has staying power, is because of that just really kind of brutal honesty, right? And I think that any kind of memoir worth its salt is going to have that honesty if it's going to stick around.
Another thing I want to touch on, which sorry, I'm about to put you on the spot with this. Earlier, you drew the parallel between his audience and your audience. You both wrote to explain to your families your experiences. So then what did that mean for you when, with Freaks of a Feather, you were the winner of the Eugene Sledge Award from the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation?
Was the most meaningful award I ever could have gotten for book. I mean, a Pulitzer, whatever, it's not the Sledge Award, so just to be recognized and even be spoken in the same sentence as Sledge was one of the greatest honors of my life. You know what I mean? And for a writer, especially like a war writer, memoirist, it is to have that acknowledgement of your peers that, hey, this you told a story that's worthy of of a Sledge Award. I mean, I couldn't be more honored to have that award.
And for my part, when I was reading this or listening to it, I immediately, I mean, this is probably really arrogant to say, but I immediately understood why you chose this book for us to read and talk about. Because I could see those parallels in what he wrote and what you wrote. Certainly 100%. different experiences, different time, different place, but the same thread runs through it. And I can't thank you enough again for putting the boot up my ass that I needed to finally experience this.
Boondockers. If we're going to talk about the book.
Well, and that's what we were talking about, is like the universality of this book, right? Is that it really goes through that young man's experience of deciding to join the Marine Corps. I mean, so we get that buildup of Sledge, and we get that like naive young kid who thinks this is what he wants, right? Which was exactly the same experience I had, and I think it can probably be said to be the experience for most Marines that decide to join up in a time of war. And it makes me think that, the grunt's always been the same kind of person. You know what I mean? We're always been the same kind of kid that romanticizes war, does all this stuff, and then has to face it. And, the consequences. I don't know what that says about me, that I read this book and wasn't able to pick up on that when I was a kid, but I just don't think it's possible to be able to, and I want to emphasize, I am no way comparing my experiences to Sledge's whatsoever, right? Because if you want to feel like a wimp, read Sledge's book, read what those guys went through.
Yeah.
So I can't even, it's not even a comparison, the experiences, but, and the feelings are the same, those feelings are universal, and that's what Sledge captures.
Yeah, there you mentioned a few things here. I do want to say that a book like this, and I guess even going back to William's question, is that had I read this book, because I wasn't reading in the same way while I was in uniform, but I did read for a similar, I wanted to have a similar outcome from my reading, and that was when when the shit is really going badly and I'm going to want to not do anything or maybe do something cowardly, I want to read about people's experiences who are in that situation, so that much in the same way that we drill all the time, or that, your pre-deployment workup cycle is constantly in the field and you're trying to have your training be as realistic as possible, so that like when my the survival instinct of my brain kicks in, the default setting that it's going to go to is my training, not survival. And so I would read in that way, so like, let me see what these guys went through, so I could sort of like download, like in the Matrix, I could download that into my hard drive, so that when I go blue screen of death, I know that at least my arms and legs will do that thing that I was reading about, or that was in line with, whatever, certification exercise we had prior to deployment. So I think that the reason that was really long-winded, but the reason that I wanted to get into it is because, Case, I wanted to touch on you being a literary artist, being someone who has really worked on your craft. What are some of the thematics that are allowing the readers, whatever the audience he intended it to be, but allow the readers to sort of get that PME out of it, that that would make it worthwhile being on the Commandant's professional reading list, vice something that's just like, there I was, I'm fucking awesome.
So if you're reading this book for craft elements, right? Like, one of the things that he starts with, right, is he starts with this honest perspective, right, throughout his decision to this young, innocent kid to join the Marines and all of these things, right? So he builds up this relationship with between the reader and the author, to where you start to trust Sledge, right? You start to trust what he's going to say. And so, I believe he achieves that through honesty, right? Through he exposes how naive he was, he shows how he worshipped the old breed, how they were these mythological creatures, and he perhaps placed them on a pedestal that maybe they did or didn't deserve. But we all do that as young people in the military. And and then once we get to the action, one of the biggest takeaways for me from this entire book, and if I'm going to steal one thing from Sledge, it's this craft element that they talk a lot about in writing classes, and that's when the action is hot, right, cold. Right. And that's this notion of, is when something really intense is truly happening, take a step back and examine it with a little bit of a detached tone and just show the reader what's happening. Right. Don't insert yourself into this. Don't pontificate on it. Just show it. Right. Let the image, let the actual event speak for itself. And Sledge is truly masterful at that. He has a magnificent way of not getting in his own way. Yeah. And that's something that I could learn a lot from, because I always have the desire to explain, to go into detail, to try to, be proud of myself for metaphors and that kind of stuff. When you can just let the image do all the work for you. And that's what Sledge does in spades. I mean, it's spectacular, right? And I don't know how much of that comes from his career as a biology professor, if he was able to kind of take that almost scientific medical, approach to viewing some of these events, but man, does it work, right? And it's the images get strung together. You get an image, another image, another image, and they all speak to each other without actually having to expressly call out what exactly is going on in Sledge's mind. And that is, that's a master class in war writing, in my opinion. And that's, again, he's able to do that too because of all the hard work he puts in with building this relationship with the reader. And again, from my perspective, like, you can read this a lot if you read the essays of George Orwell and the use of his self-deprecation that he uses in that kind of stuff. Sledge takes the book out of that and he shows his warts. Not that he's a bad guy or a bad Marine at all, but he shows his shortcomings, right? Which builds this just kind of symbiotic relationship where you're like, I feel comfortable letting Sledge into my head and tell me and show me these things. And that, I think that's why this book has the staying power that it has. It's not just a good war story. You know what I mean? There's a lot of high level writing going on here. There's a lot of just really beautiful prose. Even that short section you read, Vic. I mean, that was gorgeous. You know, and those are sprinkled throughout the whole book.
Yeah, I also too I like that he doesn't embed himself into the situation so much, because he does sort of step away and say, hey, obviously he has the footnotes and things that are helpful, super helpful, but he also steps away and says like, hey, things like this will, like the thing I just said will change later. And so you do get that sense of narration to where he's not just trying to give you the first person POV. Like there is something more happening here. I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but I did find that very interesting, also super engaging, and like you said, Casey's unbelievably humbling. Where he could have just been like, again, it's just very different than you read like the Navy SEAL memoir that the guy wrote while he was. You already had the first draft done before you even went on the operation.
Well, I think it's a matter of like his narrative voice when he's actually giving you his thoughts on things. It's done with such a light touch that it's not overpowering and you don't get lost in it. Right? He gives you just enough to let you know that he is a human being that's experiencing these things. But I mean, just what a gift to have that kind of human being there as an observer for these events. Right? Like it's just. Just luck of the universe that this kind of human being was there, lived through it, and was able to witness it and then capture this. I mean, truly, it's such a high level intellect of a sledge, that you just drop into the Pacific, and now we get that story. I mean, it's priceless.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I like the fact that he doesn't use a lot of flowery language. And the feeling that I got is that he must have been a deeply introspective person, or at the very least, he gave a lot of thought and spent a lot of time, processing these experiences before putting pen to paper, because they weren't just surface level observations. They were fully formed, fully thought out ideas.
Yeah, I mean, this is something he sat with for years and years, right? I mean, I think this book came out in the 80s. Is that right?
That's what I was just about to look up, because I know in the forward he said that he started writing it almost immediately upon returning home. But yeah, it was released in 81 was the first edition. 81. So yeah, decades.
Decades to sit and let this thing ferment and gestate. And I believe in the forward too, he references that he did keep notes while he was there.
Yeah.
Right? He kept notes in his
Bible.
Bible.
In a Bible.
Yeah, he talked about it in his pack out that he had his fountain pen with ink and waterproof writing because he knew he was gonna.
And it helps explain how, just some of the precision of his storytelling too, that he's able to actually take contemporary notes to help him write this stuff, which you don't always get. I had some contemporary notes for mine, but nothing to the level of this, I don't think. There's probably some great symbolism that a smarter person could, connect other than me with these written scratch notes being in a New Testament, but it's we should be thankful that he did it.
Yeah. Well, let's so what do you think then for sort of this current generation of Marines, folks that are still in uniform? Obviously us graybeards, we've got our thing, our reasons for attaching to the narrative or finding, seeing ourselves in it. But what about the current generation? We see the past few combat operations outside of, well, I guess even in Ukraine, you're seeing similar things, even though the drone and presence is omnipresent. You still can't take away that human aspect of combat. So what do you think? What's the takeaway that Marine soldier, sailor, airman should be taking away from this book?
I think it's the exact same stuff we were looking for. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things you'll get from Sledge's work too, is that while certain things change, right? Obviously technology changes, the actual, way we fight wars changes, but the war fighter doesn't. And the person on the ground they're going to experience these things maybe in a new technological package, but it's going to be the same, the same horrors that these people are experiencing. And you can really steel yourself by reading, Sledge's work and know that, there are those that came before you that processed these same things you did, right? And there's kind of a how-to manual, you know what I mean, for how to go about your life and how to, and then just Sledge is a good example of he just kept going, you know what I mean? He just kept going. He was a productive member of society, had accolades as a, biology professor, had a family. I mean,
what a
really,
180 life he ended up living, right?
Mm-hmm. It truly is, and he's an interesting guy too. We were talking about the, having him as an observer. He was also, fairly educated person when he enlisted, drops out of college, joins the Marines to do this thing, pretty much based off romanticism. And so, man, that's just, again, how lucky are we to have this narrative? But I think that, this generation of warfighters, they can look for the same exact reasons we were looking, right? And I think that those are universal truths that, they're going to have to face in whatever conflict they're involved in. And Sledge can be one of those pillars that, they can hold on to and, try to sort through this stuff.
He even addresses... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, sorry, Kacy. So I have a question sort of based off what we just said. So if you were present with a group of young Marines fresh in from boot camp and they were reading this book, what would you recommend that they take away from it?
Well, I think no matter what I told them, they're going to take away whatever they want, right? So that comes into that aspect of, reading books at different times in your life, right? So I would just, I don't know what I would tell them as far as like what to take away. I would just say read it, read it, and you'll find something in there you can hold on to, whether or not that just be, just an excellent war story, you know what I mean? An exciting war story, but they're going to read it and they're going to attach their own meaning. I mean, it's similar to like when I was a kid, I watched Full Metal Jacket and thought that it looked awesome. You go back and you watch Full Metal Jacket now, you're like, yikes, that is maybe not so awesome, So it doesn't really matter because I've had people ask me if my book is like pro-war, anti-war, and my answer is always it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? The young generation is going to read my book. They're going to read Sledge's book, and they're going to interpret it how they're going to interpret it. So I think just experiencing the book, taking away what you can, I would just encourage them to read as much as possible. And this should be on the list.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting that Sledge mentions the difficulty that his fellow Marines had, those who had gotten their $1 million wound and had gone home, their difficulty in reintegrating into society. That's something we really didn't talk about a lot until recently. And so it kind of caught me off guard that it was part of this book.
Well, even the medical term for it back then was shell shock. Like that's the medical term for what these guys were going through. So, I mean, it was being dismissed, even like not just at a societal level, but even at a medical, at the physician level.
Yeah, no. And he specifically mentions, people feeling that no one understands, just their Marine buddies or their, the people they served in combat with were the only ones who would understand them, that they came back to the civilian world, to, where there isn't a war. And I think the way he phrases it is something like, correct me if I'm wrong here, Kacy, that the American people wouldn't really understand what was going on unless an American city had been bombed. But then, as they talked about it among themselves, it was like, well, but we don't want it to be our city and we don't want anyone to actually get hurt. But we kind of wish this could happen so people could really understand what is going on.
Yeah, and again, it just goes back to these, universal truths of the experience, right? Like these guys, they had way less, tools and assistance than we have nowadays for trying to reintegrate back into society and that kind of stuff. But again, you drop people into the absolute horror show of the Pacific, and then you just send them back home, and you're supposed to just be a productive member of society. You're not supposed to hold any disdain for your fellow Americans who didn't serve, and it's impossible, right? You can't. It's avoiding those feelings is literally impossible. But being able to read a story like this and say, oh, this has been going on. This is what warfighters have always faced. This is this reintegration, this general disdain that you can have for the public that you were allegedly protecting. You're going to have those feelings. And Sledge is a good example of somebody who just kept moving forward. Kept pulling the trigger and going to work. And made it kind of a beautiful life out of it. But it's it's one of those stories and one of those things. And Vic, you bring up a good point of like, even the medical diagnosis was much colder back then in shell shock. George Carlin has a great bit about that, actually, about like the different syllables attached to post-traumatic stress and all these kind of things and how we've softened it over time. And shell shock was actually like brunt and sounded really bad. And by the time you get it, we've softened it with so many syllables by now that it's somewhat lessened. But and that applies to, people outside of combat as well. But no, it's a good point, Nancy. Like it's one of those things that Sledge was dealing with that, people out of the GWAT have been dealing with as well. And it's Sledge doesn't have any answers because I don't know if there are any concrete answers, but at least you can commiserate and you can see that you're not alone.
Yeah. Have you read the I don't want to call it the sequel, but the Old Breed, the complete story revealed? It was written by Sledge's son or put together by Sledge's son. I think it was maybe a year ago or so.
No, I haven't picked that up yet.
I think I'm going to have to put that next on my list unless Vic gives me another assignment.
Oh yeah, no, you got.
No. So excellent job shaming me for not reading that, Nancy. That's a good point. I should have read that. No, I have not.
No, I wasn't trying to. No, I mean, I just wonder, because now I'm curious. I'm one of these people who, like, if I read something, then I got to go down the entire rabbit hole. And if that person has read or written anything else, I have to read everything they've written. I got to find out about them. I'm sure there must be something wrong with me, but anyway. So
a fun exercise though is, Vic, you were talking earlier about the Pacific, the television program. If you watch like back to back, if you watch Band of Brothers and then you watch the Pacific and you kind of watch them in close proximity, the juxtaposition of the European theater versus the Pacific theater, it's really striking. What I mean? It's really, while obviously, horrific things were happening in the European theater, and it was such a different kind of war, such a different kind of conflict.
Yeah.
And watching those two things together, you can really see, and you can really see too the difference in, Marines and soldiers, right? Just the way that they're talking about war. It's like these are two very distinct groups, and their perspective of the war are very different. So I encourage people to do that too. That's a really cool experience to see those two conflicts next to each other like that. And both of those shows are excellent.
Yeah. Agreed, 100%. Hey, did you ever spend any time on Oki?
No, never.
See, I even catch myself now, like, so I think for those who are in uniform, especially for those who are going to do any time over at 3rd Marine Division, like, I was there, granted, we were sort of jumping, it was sort of our area before we were going to go into Afghanistan after 9/11, and then we ended up staying in Asia, but not really on Okinawa. But even while I was there, I just didn't understand the magnitude of what it was, what the Okinawa campaign was all about, because it's obviously so westernized now, and we're so far removed from it. But yeah, I think that for and you sort of talked about this early on, Kacy, but like, just understand your legacy, understand your history, understand what it is that, there's a massive PX down in Kinville because of the fact that what the Marines went through to get to this point, and how, and to really appreciate how so much has changed in the, it's kind of the scope of things in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, it was just, there are some people that are still alive when we were fighting this war. And so, excuse me. So just understand that the realities of it, and like what it took for the Marine Corps to make Okinawa into what it is today. It's not insignificant.
No, and I mean, you mentioned a little bit, but it's like this was not that long ago.
Yeah.
Like it seems like this was forever ago. But I think of history in terms of like people. So this was like a grandparent or a couple of grandparents ago. You know what I mean? Like this was not that long ago, and we were, we're I don't know how many World War II vets are alive, but there's still people around. And it's so we have a direct connection with this conflict, and Marines should definitely, if they have the opportunity, to dive into this history while they're serving, and it'll give you a greater perspective on what you're doing.
Man, and shameless plug for William. If people really want to get an overview of the battle, William, can you take the shameless plug?
Yeah, thank you. How did I?
Here, I toss you that football.
William, check out your documentary is awesome, dude.
Yeah, check out our YouTube channel. You can see we have a documentary on the Battle of Okinawa. It's about an hour long, all original footage. We have such illustrious voice actors as Mr. Vic Rubel. So it's definitely worth your time. We go into the weeds, go into stories, and it's primarily from the Marine Corps perspective, but definitely to our audience, go check it out.
I went back and took a look at parts of it yesterday. Just again, like I said, I go down a rabbit hole. I just want to completely immerse myself and learn about whatever it is I'm reading. The hell with folding laundry and cooking dinner. I don't need to do that crap. So I did go back and look at part of the documentary again, William, and I'm gonna give the whole thing another view as soon as I finish those last few pages of this book, just so I can get the whole picture in my head. And then I have two more shameless plugs. The other one is because Sledge references Pavuvu so often. About 10, 12 years ago in Leatherneck, we ran an article about Pavuvu, and at the time, I had never heard of Pavuvu before, but it was one of those pieces that it got in my head, and I was like, I got to know more about this. And really great article. You can go back in our archives and take a look at that to fill you in a little more, and also some great archival photographs with that.
Yeah.
And then my final shameless plug of the day is for those of you listening who want to read this book, visit the MCA's bookstore and buy a copy of it.
Yeah, awesome.
Solid plug.
No, for real,
Solid
do
plug.
that. That would be great.
Please buy it.
That's why you guys keep me around for all that annoying stuff, right?
Nancy, talking about like getting in the weeds, like if you really get into the weeds of like the Pacific Theater and like books to understand who the enemy was, and kind of some of the things that the Japanese were up to, there's two books that I've read that have like significantly impacted my worldview. And that is, the first one is The Rape of Nanking, about what the Japanese did to the Chinese. That should be required reading. It's hard to read. I mean, there's times you got to put the book away and just go for a walk or something. And the second one is Unit 731, about the Japanese concentration camps. And I'm not sure why these stories don't get more play. I don't know if it's just simple racism that we focus on, the European stuff over the Pacific Theater stuff. But man, those are two books that you read, those books that they stick with you forever.
Yeah. Another one, if I might, what we're doing, is read Just Americans. So if you're into the European theater, but you want to learn about Japanese Americans, read Just Americans, because it's about the unit. And I always drop the ball on this, but it was the 441st or whatever out of Hawaii that pulled Japanese Americans from the concentration camps to go fight in North Africa and Europe. Fantastic book. Book. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so much moral grayness in all of that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's hard, it's difficult, but it's something, if you're trying to understand the conflict, it's good to just touch on all those things.
Well, but definitely for books, pick up With the Old Breed. Kacy, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy day to nerd out with us and dive into this wonderful selection from the Commandant's Professional Reading List. And your perspective is just, it really makes it's very enriching to hear your thoughts on this book. So thanks, man.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.